guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lily. Today I like to bring you my December wrap up. It's a bit late because I've had so much going on at the end of December and the new year, and then starting work almost immediately after New Year. So it's all been a little bit chaotic. So, while this is still December relevant, I'd like to show you some of my Christmas presents before I get into books. My uncle is very good at buying me like bookish kind of presents, and he just amazes me with how bookish he is. So the first thing he got me was this t-shirt which has a poem thing on it. It's quite hard to read, I think, on camera, so I'll read some of it. It says, "I will read books on a boat, I will read books with a goat, I will read books on the train, I will read books in the rain, I will read books with rain, a fox, I will read books in a box, I will read books with a mouse, I will read books in a house, I will read books here or there, I will read books everywhere." And yeah, so this is like my new pyjama top that I absolutely love. The other thing he got me was amazing, and that is this. Look at it, it's so good. This is a book light. He also bought me like a charging cable that kind of lights up and you can see the energy going through it, and it's amazing. But this is wonderful. It's so warm and it's lovely to read by, actually. Book light. Oh, and it's just so satisfying how like the light dims. Look at that. And you can kind of feel, I don't know if it's magnetized, but you can kind of feel it slowly. Oh, I just love it. And the other thing he bought me was this tote bag. I don't really use tote bags very often. I mostly use them for like going food shopping and things like that. And this one's got very robust handles, so very good next time I want to go get some party food and things. But it's beautiful. Look at all the books. And the only book I got for Christmas actually was The Return of Sherlock Holmes, which is great because my only other copy of this book has really tiny font that I can't actually see even with my glasses. But yeah, this is really nice. Ooh, what's that? Huh, okay. But this has like really nice normal sized font and some illustrations and things. So I'm looking forward to doing that. To getting into this one, because I've not actually read Sherlock Holmes in a long time, so that would be great. For the books that I actually read in December, it was a pretty good month. I can't actually remember what all my ratings were, damn it. So the first book that I read in December was a book of Tides by Angela Readman, and this is a book of poetry. This poetry collection I picked up because I'd just done Jane Campbell's poetry workshop, which was all about fairy tales and things like that, and I got really interested in different people's takes on fairy tales and fairy tale retellings, especially in poetry. And this one was really highly rated, so I picked it up. And it was what people said it was, but I just didn't find it was very for me. And I think I wanted a bit more. I didn't really feel connected to any of the poems. I didn't really feel challenged or interested particularly. So this one was a little bit of a letdown for me, but I think it's still a great poetry collection, and I do recommend it to people if you are especially interested in fairy tale retellings in poetry. It's definitely an interesting read. The next book that I read in December was The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. Me and a friend buddy read this, and I actually kind of sped on ahead and I was a bit naughty, so I finished it way before she did. But this was one heck of a read. I rated this, I originally rated it 5 stars, but I actually brought that down to 4.5, 4 stars. This is an extraordinary trilogy which I highly recommend to anybody who loves fantasy and anybody who doesn't like fantasy, because you should read it anyway. It's so good. I don't want to talk too much about it because I actually want to make a full review about this. I'd like to write it first though, so it might be a little bit incoming. So I'm not sure when I'll get that up, but I really do want to discuss this, especially the ending. And I think the ending was the bit where I think this book dropped in rating for me. I felt like she'd set so much up, and everything was so careful all the way through this series, like the first and second books. There is nothing in these books that isn't there without purpose. But I think this book especially, it introduced a few things that just didn't go anywhere, and also it didn't really do anything with the things that had been introduced in previous books. So I feel like this was a little bit rushed in the end, which is unfortunate. But actually the acknowledgements and notes in the back kind of make that, yeah, actually that's what happened. The author's mother was dying at the time she wrote this book, and I think some of that really does show in this book because it does feel a little bit more rushed than the others, and I think it could have been that much more perfect. It's hard to say because I really love this book. This was amazing. I read this in like 2 days flat. It was like really quick. I loved it. I love the characters. It was just, yeah, I think that N.K. Jemisin is the kind of writer who could have done just that little bit more with it. But yeah, I will save my more detailed thoughts on that for my review, I think. The next book that I read was Island at the End of Everything by Kiran Millwood Hargrave, and this is a children's middle grade novel. It is absolutely beautiful. I read Kiran's first book, The Girl of Ink and Stars, last year, as in 2016, when it first came out, and I had quite high expectations of it and I was quite disappointed by it. I only gave it 3 stars in the end. I just thought it was very underdeveloped, the characterization was a bit poor, and the ending was just a bit what? So this book was amazing. This book is so beautiful, it's so well crafted. There's a full plot arc, character arcs, the characters are so interesting and intricate and well fleshed out, and the setting is really interesting. The book is about a little girl who lives in a leper colony with her mother who suffers from leprosy, and it's set, I think, at the turn of the century, and a new governor comes to this island and basically says that all the healthy people need to leave, especially the children, and the unhealthy people need to stay. So this breaks up families, and the little girl is sent away from her mother to a school on another island. So many beautiful things in here about families, and a lovely friendship between 2 girls, and really interesting but quite subtle things about mental illnesses and suffering and death and grief and coming to terms with things and responsibility as well in those things. And I think it's a really beautiful novel for children. I think it's fantastically written as well. She already had this really very natural, beautiful and descriptive kind of writing style, but this really comes out in here really well. So I really recommend this, and I gave this one 5 stars as well. The next book that I read was actually a reread. This was Nicholas St. North and the Battle of the Nightmare King by William Joyce and Laura Gertner. And this one I read several years ago. It's the first book in the Guardians of Childhood series, which the series as a whole have kind of combined and made into the film that most people know as Rise of the Guardians. And this is the origin story of one of the characters in that film, Nicholas St. North. You won't really recognise much of the film in this book, and I don't think in any of the other books either, because the film is set like 300 years after this. But this is really like the origin story of how he became a guardian. It's not really an origin story of Santa, but there is definitely that kind of element in there, and it's just very kind of whimsical, and it's told in a sort of fairy tale. You've got a kind of narrator who sounds like he's one of those fireside storytellers, and it's just very warm, and I think this is a great book to read to children aloud, and yeah, it's just really nice. I think it's a nice book. The 5th book that I read in December was The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell, and this is a book I've been so looking forward to all the way through November, because in November I decided that I would only read non-fiction and I wouldn't read anything else, and Harry Potter was my exception, but I was just so looking forward to this book all the way through, so I was really glad to finally get to it. This is Jen Campbell's first short story collection. There are 10 short stories in this book, and they're all kind of based in fairy tale or fairy tale themes or motifs and things like that, and it's just wonderfully creative and really imaginative. Some of the stories didn't really quite click with me in the way that I hoped they might. Some of them were a bit maybe going over my head, I'm not sure. Having heard Jen Campbell talk about this book, I feel like there's a lot more that can be explored in this than I think I got out of it in a first reading. So I really do want to go back to it and read some of those stories that I didn't quite connect with, and maybe try and look a bit deeper into them. My favourite story in this was The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night, and it's a conversation between 2 people, a couple, I think, in bed in the middle of the night, and it's written in the style of a script, and it's just so wonderful, and you can really hear the characters' voices, and it's just wonderful. I loved it. I loved that story so much. It was just so heartwarming and creative, and just so reminiscent of real conversations in the middle of the night like that. They're just like so bonkers, but so like down to earth and realistic as well. So I really enjoyed that story. I also enjoyed, I can't remember the name of it, so Plum Pie, Zombie Green, Yellow Bee, Purple Monster. This one I really liked. It's about a group of children in a school, and they've all got a bodily difference in some way that is kind of linked to plants. So they're all growing different parts of themselves, or there's something different about them, but it's linked to kind of plants. And it's really, really interesting, and it reminded me a lot of, what was her name? I think it's Karen Russell's St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves, that story specifically, also, which is also about a group of children who are in a kind of home, and they've all come from the wild, and one of these children is not fitting in the way that they should. They are still reverting back to their old wolfish ways. And this book kind of reminded me of that. There's one child who's missing, and you're unsure what's really happened to her, if it's some kind of natural plant thing, or if she's been experimented on, or don't know what's happened. And I really liked that one. It was really intriguing, and yeah, that was really enjoyable for me. I also liked Aunt Libby's Coffin Hotel. I thought that one was really cool, but it felt like the start of a novel. Like, I want to know more, and I want to see what happens next, and like, I find a lot of short story collections, they don't really connect in the way that this book connects. All the stories are so well put together and well linked that they're just, you can kind of seamlessly go through all of them. Whereas other short story collections that I've read, the stories within are all a bit disconnected. You could really tell this book that each story was written for this collection. It wasn't a series of stories that were written over a series of years that were all just kind of, oh, they'll all fit together and put into a book. No, these stories were all written with the purpose of being in this book, and you can really tell. And it's a really, really strong short story collection, and I gave this one 4 stars. The last book that I read in December was Ash and Quill by Rachel Caine, and if you've seen my what book? What was it? I think it was a book haul. If you've seen one of the book hauls where I talk about this book and I'm like proper nervous to read it because I'm so terrified it would be awful. So the story behind this one is, this is the 3rd book in a series by Rachel Caine. It's about the Library of Alexandria if it had never burned down, and it's a fascinating concept. Basically, the library controls the entire world's access to information, and the main characters are people who are kind of bringing down the system. So it's that kind of typical YA book. The first book I absolutely loved. The second book I thought was awful. It was such a letdown. It was so disappointing, and it was just like, oh, it put me in such a grump for so long. And I was really nervous to pick this one up because not only is this no longer the last book, it's now a 5-book trilogy, but like there were so many things around this book that I just thought, oh no, it's just going pear-shaped. But actually, when I read this book, it was much better than the second one. I was so relieved. I was really invested again in the characters. The characters felt really compelling, and there was a lot more kind of depth to the characters as well. Their emotions felt a lot more palatable. This book was a lot more character driven than plot driven. I think that was a problem with the second book, was it was so plot driven. The characters were just kind of pulled from place to place, and it was like Scooby-Doo, and it just didn't work, and it didn't really make sense, and it was trying to do too much, I think, whereas this was actually quite simple. The story of this is literally them trying to get out of a place they've got themselves into, not in the Scooby-Doo sense, but in a way that is actually really interesting because it's talking a lot about the politics of this particular place and the characters, how they're kind of navigating this situation they've got themselves in, but also navigating their own kind of friendships that are a little bit issuey. We also get to see more of the main character's brother, which is really interesting because he's been a bit of an enigma all the way through the series. You're not quite sure if they like each other or hate each other or both or what. And the ending of this one, I think, worked a lot better than the ending of the last one. Rachel Caine definitely has a love of dramatic, action-packed endings. And this one was no different, but I think this one worked a lot better than the previous 2. So I'm actually feeling a lot better about this series now, and I will be continuing with it. It's not going to be my favourite of the year kind of a series or favourite series ever, but it's definitely compelling enough to keep me going. So yeah, I recommend it. If you can push through book 2, it's actually worth getting to. Yay! So that was my December wrap up. So like always, I would love to have a conversation with you about these books, if you've read any of them, if you're looking forward to any of them, if you hated any of them, that's fine to have a conversation about too. So thank you for watching, guys, and goodbye. But with the winds have brought all the pollen from everywhere and I'm going insane. I'm rambling now.